Hey everybody, this is going to be a video that in response to a comment I received from an individual who is struggling with the wonderful Department of Child Support Services, and I figured this would be a good opportunity to kind of go over this stuff again, because I know that this can be frustrating and painful. First thing I want to say before I really jump into my notes on this is, if you're in the middle of this or in the start, not in the middle, if you're in the start of this, there's a high possibility that everything I'm going to say on this is going to be very frustrating, probably emotionally charged, so to speak. But stick with me through this and listen to the whole thing, because I think if you can just hear the message, it might actually be helpful for you to understand what's going on and your way forward. So what I want to hit on is a topic of the Department of Child Support Services, which I call the automated machine of destruction. Now, your state may have something different, but in this great state of California, they call it the Department of Child Support Services. And I know that when I first started out, excuse me, when the court was like, we're going to garnish your pay and we're going to do this and we're going to do that, it was very frustrating and I took it very personally. But as I've had time to go through this, I have had a modification, so to speak, in how I think of this. And the two main topics we're going to go over is, and it's kind of based on what my experience with this and what I've seen other people have issues with and or struggle with. And that is, going back over to these slides, our impression, what we think, and reality, what actually happens. Now, I know for me, when I first got into this, and God, I was so naive. And so the first thing on that, on our impressions, is we all think justice will prevail. We're going to get into court. They're going to be neutral parties. They're going to see through the BS. They're going to hold the other person accountable, and justice will ultimately prevail. Now, remember, I'm on our impressions. This is kind of what you think whenever you're going into court. The next thing is you think that the court is going to be fair. That, of course, they're going to look at everything and they're going to be, not draconian or brutal in whatever decision they make and how things come in. Of course, it's going to be fair. Of course, they're going to listen to your side, and things you will ultimately prevail in this thing. And I really feel bad for all the people who are starting out, because I did. I mean, I went in thinking that this was going to be, they'd see through it. They'd hold the ex accountable. They weren't going to just basically give her everything, and things would be fair, and I would be able to disentangle myself out of this nightmare. And I was wrong. Anyways, so the next thing is, the other thing we think, this is what I thought, is that for anything to happen further on down the line, specifically in regards to the Department of Child Support Services, that a judge's signature would be required, that a hearing would be required, that we would have to go back to court before some arbitrary change made, or if there was some modification or whatever, that I would have an opportunity to make my case be heard in court before some arbitrary decision was rendered. That was a shocking realization when I realized that wasn't the case. And finally, and I kind of hit on this in my last comment, is of course, the court and or the Department of Child Support Services just isn't going to go after me. They're not going to just, willy-nilly ignore anything and just and be an automated machine of destruction. If you remember back to that first slide where I talk about that right there, the automated machine of destruction. Now, I'm trying to make light of this, and I appreciate the fact that if you're struggling through this isn't funny. This is very stressful. I'm trying to add some levity into it. And I'm also trying to demonstrate that as a person who's gone through this, been through the machine for 12 years, and now I'm on the other side of it. Child support's finally ended a few months ago. I'm still dealing with alimony, but the 12 years that I paid for child support on 3 kids is finally ended, and they stopped garnishing my pay in September of last year. So let me just get back to my points, just bumping through the bullets. And I might, when I get to the next section, I'll go over some examples of what I experienced. So the reality, and this is when I swear to God, when I started this, it started to feel like no matter what happened, whatever should happen, there was like a caveat. It's like, oh, this should go in this person's favor. Addendum. And you'd flip the page and it said, if your name is DSD, you lose. You lose. Good day, sir. I laugh about that now, but I was not laughing about that before. I'm like, I got to the point, even now, I am still gun shy about doing anything. And I'm before I go back to court to deal with the alimony thing, I'm being very methodical and looking at information to make sure I understand completely what the potential pitfalls might be in doing that. Because I swear it felt like every time that I stood up for myself, I got smacked down or was told the wrong thing, or it was a caveat. It was like, well, yeah, that's true, but if this happens, it's not true. And I got burned a few times by that. So whoops, what did I do? I hit the wrong button. Let me get back over. I wonder how I did that. How did I mess that up? Anyways, okay, back to reality. Oh, it keeps clearing out and it keeps going back. All right, let me see if I can fix this real quick because that's bizarre. Somehow I messed that up. Let's see here. All right, I guess I'll use the keyboard. Okay, the first one. Our versions of reality are different than theirs. And that was very difficult for me to comprehend. I thought I had a completely different idea of what I thought was going to happen as opposed to what happened. And that was a bitter pill. That was a bitter pill to swallow. For instance, I thought when I finally had this epiphany, I'm like, okay, of course, kids are in school. There is no way they're going to not force her to go back to work, my ex, and make me still pay for her to basically be retired. I'm like, of course they're not. They're not going to do that. And that's exactly what happened. I was talking to a buddy of mine this morning, actually literally this morning, and we were talking about this, and I think it's almost a lesson that I had to learn on letting go. Because I was so angry that I had been used and lied to, manipulated for 2 decades. And I was like, okay, fine. The gravy train's over. You're going to have to jump in the real world and deal with it. And that is not true. I effectively had to pay her to stay at home. So I was paying basically the house, the rent, food. I mean, everything. Everything was being paid for by me, and she did not have to work at all until the 2 of the kids dropped off, and then she finally had to get a job. And that took, 7 or 8 years? So that was a few years ago. And even anyways, so I'm like, of course that's not going to happen. And it did. So our version of justice is, when I say theirs, I'm talking about the court. It's completely different than what they think is going to happen. Now, there's the next thing is FAIR is a formula, and it literally is a formula in most states. It's called Guideline Support Agreement, where they key in the numbers. All they do is they go to the calculator, they key in your pay, they key in the ex's pay. In my situation, it was 0. they key in the kids, and it spits out a number that was incredibly painful that you're going to pay. And in my situation, it was, if I remember correctly, technically on the first term, when I first went before it got to the permanent orders, it was 64% of my entire take-home pay I was ordered to give to her. And it was brutal. I mean, it was like, think about it. Imagine if you take what your pay is right now, and not the total pay, and I'm just like what you actually take home, multiply that by 64%, and the lower, the 40, what is that? 37%. Am I doing that right? The 37% is what you get. It was painful. I say quite painful, and it was incredibly painful. I barely had enough money to pay my rent, put gas in the car, and a little bit of food. And actually, until I got the custody changed to 50-50, I almost was to the point that I was going to start, when I didn't have the kids, I was going to start sleeping under my desk because I couldn't afford to drive back and forth from home and then have the lights on. And I was just like, I was really thinking like, okay, well, if I just stayed in the office, there's a shower in here. I mean, I could just sleep under and keep in mind at the time I was a department head. I had 220 people with civilians, military, and contractors working for me. And I was seriously considering doing that, just staying in my office and sleeping under the desk because I was trying to think of how I could save money. So again, I'm not trying to say, what I mean in this is that I know this sounds terrible, and I've been through a hell of a lot, and I know you are going through a lot, but look at me now, right? I mean, I've made it to the other side of this. I didn't implode on myself, although it was close multiple times. I was able to persevere and make it to the other side of this, and now I'm way on the other side of it. You will too. It's just dealing with this is incredibly, incredibly frustrating. So here is another frustrating thing that I did not quite understand, and it's that the Department of Child Support Services has automatic authority to self-generate orders. And this was how the comment that came up from the individual today. They were like, hey, what's a court order? And I just, I'm getting a wage garnishment order, and they're trying to do all this stuff, and it's not stamped. It's not, it's not an official court order. How can they do that? And that's exactly what I thought. And, whenever those orders started flying, it was like, holy crap. And I had a guy who worked with me who had a similar situation where his ex went and told Department of Child Support Services because he was paying her directly. Let's see if this works. Don't ever pay the person directly if you can afford it. And if you do, make sure you write down child support on the check and that you have a 100% accounting of it. You're better off if they're garnishing it, and I'll get at that in a minute. What happened to him is he was had a joint account, and he would dump money into it. She needed more money after him doing that for 5 or 6 years. She called up the Department of Child Support Services and said, he's a deadbeat. I don't think I've been getting enough child support. And then they went and looked, and they're like, holy cow, there's an order for him to pay child support for like the last 5 or 6 years or whatever it was. And they basically said, hey, scumbag, Mr. Deadbeat, we want 5 years times, whatever it was a month, $500 a month immediately. And he thought, just like I said here, he thought that, or what I was saying to him before, that he would have his moment in court, that he would get called in front of a judge, he would be able to give his side of the story and, stop this. What happened? They self-generated orders, intercepted his what do you call it? retirement account for the arrears, because now, he went from being almost done, his kid was almost 18, excuse me, to now owing, 5, 6, it was like 30 some odd $1,000 he owed. And he about lost his mind. He's like, how is that possible? I'm like, dude, that's exactly what they do. I had a situation where I was, $200. I've had it. See, here's the thing you guys got to remember. When the court order says you owe $1,000 a month and they send it to your employer, they typically, if you get paid once a month, you're fine. Or if you get paid on the 1st and the 15th, like always twice a month, you're basically fine because the numbers add up. But if you're like me and you get paid every 2 weeks, well, that means 2 months out of the year, you get 3 paychecks, and the rest of them you get 2. And when you take 1,000 times 12 divided by 26, that is not equal to $1,000 a month. So effectively, you are running, if you don't plus up the account, you're running behind. And first time I figured this out was whenever I submitted my tax return and the state of California intercepted my return. And I'm like, well, that's weird. And they're like, well, you were $100 in arrears, so we took our $100. I'm like, oh, geez. So I had that happen a couple of times. Then I finally just, if at all possible, make sure that you have a plus up. If you're in that situation where it's twice a month, make sure that your account never goes below 0. So you might have to put extra money in there, and that's what I did is as it went on, and when I would get to the point, because I didn't have the money just to put it in there, when I would get to the point where I was, zeroed out, and then it started going to arrears, I would just plus that. I would just like, okay, so I'm $50 below, I'll throw $50 in there. And I just did that until I got to 0, to where no matter what, the account always had like a penny or $1 more than it needed to. And I say that because when another period of time before I finally did that, I had them also intercept and try to seize my retirement account for like $200. They showed that I was $200 in arrears, and they put a lien against my retirement account to recoup that money. And they didn't even know and again, just going back here, when I called and asked, they didn't even know that they quote unquote did it, because the system, the automated machine of destruction, automatically put that order in to do it. And as I was talking to them and I was asking them like, hey, what's going on? It looks like you guys did this. Why did you do it? And I remember at one point calling them, or they called me back, ring, ring. And I answered the phone. My youngest was in the car with me. And they're like, hi, Mr. Knucklehead. And I'm like, hey, what's going on? He goes, well, I can't find, this is literally what she said. She goes, well, I can't find where we seized or tried to seize your retirement account, 401k. But I do see where we put an order in to have your driver's license suspended because of because you were in arrears, but it wasn't processed. And I about lost my mind because I would lose my job in that situation. So that was a very difficult lesson to learn, in that they do have the ability to generate orders. And I remember one of those times when that happened, it was early on, and they're like, oh no, everything's fine. And then I got an extra garnishment for being in arrears. There's just a longer story to that. I'll tell that another time, or actually I've covered that in previous videos. And when I called my finance, or my HR area, or the finance people, and I got a copy of it, it had that person, the person who said everything was going to be fine, it had her name on it. So when I called and said, hey, what happened? I don't know what you're talking about. And I said, on page 3 of this document, it has your name on it. It's like you're the one who basically is saying this is going to happen. And that's when I learned that the machine will automatically generate orders and stamp the caseworker's name who's on it to validate it / justify it. So, and my final comment on this is that the enforcement arm of the court, is brutal. So, and the hard part about this is that, especially when you're in the beginning part of this, is you just feel like everything is against you. Like no matter what you do, you're just getting mighty blow after mighty blow. And it's very demoralizing. And you're learning this as you, like for me, I learned all of this stuff the hard way. I didn't have anybody that pulled me aside and said, hey man, this is how it goes. This is how this process plays out. You need to be aware of it and understand it so that you don't beat your head against the wall and spiral out of control. Now it's a double-edged sword, because what I will say is every time I learned one of these lessons or someone would tell me something, it would totally anger me. I did not have a very rational response to it. That little story I was telling you when they called my kid was in the car, I lost it on the phone. I couldn't freaking believe that they would put for a, not a rounding error, but for something that, you know, a couple of $100 in arrears just because of the way the money, you know, because of the way I got paid, that they were willing to effectively destroy my career, ruin any ability for me to make money and have insurance and stuff like medical and everything for the kids, because the system thought I was a couple of $100 in arrears because that third paycheck hadn't come up. I just it was like unfathomable. I mean, I guess technically it didn't actually happen, but when she told me, and it was like nonchalant, it's like, well, I see right here where we pushed an order to the, you know, Department of Motor Vehicles to suspend your driver's license, but for some reason it didn't go through. And I couldn't believe it. I'm like, are you fucking kidding me? And I got louder and more angry. To be honest, I'm surprised she didn't hang up on me. So the thing is, and the reason I bring this up, and the thing is that the individual, I mean, I could tell when I was reading their comment, I should have probably pulled their comment in so I could have covered it, but I could see where that guy was, because he was angry. He was like, this is not true. Actually, in the comment, he said he told his HR people, you know, it's like, well, you're going to follow, you know, you're just following, you know, nothing. There's no court order, you know, you're not authorized to do it. And I'm like, man, I get where he's coming from, because when that stuff happened to me, I was so pissed. I couldn't believe it. And it's weird, you know, as time goes on, you just kind of learn to let, and I know I'm going to say this and it's probably going to frustrate some people, but you just learn to let certain things go. Like for instance, the Department of Child Support Services screwed up my order with my employer at one point when the second kid fell off. I can't remember. They did something stupid. It's like they accidentally like shut off. They turned off alimony. I think it was alimony. And then they left on child support. And then when they fixed it, they just made it all child support. And it was annoying. And it kind of made my accounting a little different. But I'm like, I don't care. I'm just not going to fight it. Technically, the number's what it is, and I'm not worried about it. Hell, there was even anyways, whatever. It's just, you got to learn to pick your battles. And you got to decide what's worth your energy. And I get, you know, see, the thing I struggle with when I say these type of things is I can think back to when I was in that moment. And it's not like PTSD. It's not like I'm feeling that whole feeling again, but I can kind of, you know, I kind of have that, I don't know how to say it, but, you know, I can remember the taste, I guess, of that moment. And it was so hard. And every time somebody told me how this wasn't going to be fair, it would just anger me. I would just go straight. I would just go straight to anger. And there wasn't much, you know, it's just, the way this is, it's the way it plays out. And it's like designed to try to break you. It's like the whole thing goes in because it's like, all right, how many buttons can we push on this guy to see if we can make him pop? And I mean, there were times where I thought I was going to pop. I mean, it was just so much. And you could, pop can mean a bunch of different things. So I'm sure as I'm saying this, you in your own mind know what, and don't write it in the comments, please. Don't document it. It's so weird, right? Because I look back and I mean, I can remember those days and sometimes I'm like, man, how did I get through it? I didn't have a person to go to. I didn't have a DSD channel or somebody who understood it and somebody who would say, man, it's going to be okay. It sucks. It hurts, but it's going to be okay. And but it's not going to be okay because you get justice or the person is held accountable. I mean, they do get held accountable, just not in the way we think. So if you're in the beginning places, in the beginning stages of this, and you're just starting to experience this, slow yourself down. Check out my playlist, The Mindset for Narcissistic Abuse Recovery. I have thousands of videos now and live streams and everything that cover a lot of this stuff. Or you can review some of the older material. Hopefully this video will help. Just hang in there. When you're feeling really down, give yourself a break. Maybe just go to sleep. Don't drink, don't do drugs, don't self-medicate, because that doesn't help. But try to find healthy ways to help alleviate the stress. And I'm telling you, you get to the other side of this and you realize that even though these people tried to break you, that you were able to survive and persevere, and your life gets better out of it. I mean, I'm a poorer person. I'm a poorer person today, but my life is so much better now after getting away from the ex, not having her BS in my daily life, and just clearing myself out. Do I wish it would have not taken 12 years to finally do that? And when I say that, I mean to be done with the court thing. The other thing I will tell you is I made my peace with all of this and was doing a lot better before my first kid fell off. So this isn't, hey, I'm doing okay now because, 12 years after the fact, child support's done and and I'm starting to be able to live my life. Now, I figured out how to live my life when I was still getting brutalized, when I still was living paycheck to paycheck, when I was running basically every 2 weeks, I was running my check down to zero. And I was making decent money at the time. And I made my peace with it. You know what? I'm not going to feed into this crap anymore. I'm not going to let it keep making me angry because it is affecting my life. And every day that I do that, every day I stay frustrated is a day I lose taking my life back. So hang in there. I hope this was helpful. And I'll catch you on the next one. Take care.